Karoline Leavitt insults Kash Patel. Go back to India, but his response shocks all of America. The studio lights were blinding, but Kash Patel barely noticed them. After years of public service and countless interviews, he'd grown used to the heat of the spotlight. But nothing could prepare him for what was about to happen live on national television. Sitting across from him was Karoline Leavitt, sharp-tongued and eager to score points in front of the cameras. The conversation had started civilly enough, discussions about politics, security, and America's future. But as the debate grew heated, Karoline's words suddenly cut through the air like a dagger. "Why don't you just go back to India?" she snapped, her voice dripping with disdain. The room went silent. The moderator froze. The audience gasped. On social media, fingers raced across keyboards, clips already being snipped and shared. But Kash smiled, not out of mockery, not in anger, but with a calmness that unsettled everyone watching. He leaned forward, eyes steady, voice warm. "You know," Kash said softly, "my parents did come here from India. They arrived with almost nothing, just a few suitcases and a heart full of hope. They worked long hours so that their son could have the privilege of sitting here today, on this stage, in this great country." The audience shifted in their seats. Karoline blinked, unprepared for the calm dignity of his response. "My father drove cabs in Queens. My mother worked night shifts as a nurse. They never complained, not once. They believed America was worth every sacrifice. And they taught me something far more important than politics, that when someone throws hate at you, the greatest strength is to respond with love." The crowd grew quiet, hanging on his every word. Kash paused, then added with a faint smile. "So, if you're asking me to go back to India, well, I carry India in my blood. But I carry America in my soul. And this," he spread his arms wide, "is my home." The audience erupted into applause. Even the moderator, usually bound by neutrality, nodded with tears glistening in her eyes. But then something unexpected happened. Kash looked directly at Karoline, not with anger, but with compassion. "Karoline," he said gently, "I don't blame you. I know those words didn't come from strength, they came from fear. And fear divides us. But I believe you're better than that. We all are. You don't need to see me as a foreigner. I'm your neighbor, your fellow American. We're on the same team, whether you realize it or not." Karoline's face hardened at first, but the sincerity in his voice cracked something inside her. For the first time that night, she had no comeback. Just silence. The clip spread like wildfire across America. But what shocked people wasn't just the insult, it was Kash's response. Instead of anger, he chose empathy. Instead of fueling division, he chose healing. Days later, Kash visited a community center in Detroit where immigrant children were studying after school. They had watched the viral clip, and one little boy with big glasses tugged on Kash's sleeve. "Mr. Patel," he whispered shyly, "my classmates tell me to go back, too. But when I saw you on TV, I felt like maybe I belong." Kash knelt down, his eyes softening. "You don't just belong," he told the boy, "you're exactly what makes this country strong. Never forget that." And in that moment, the boy smiled, not just with his lips, but with the unshakable light of a child who finally believed he was home. The emotional climax resonated across the nation. Parents shared the clip with their children. Teachers brought it into classrooms to talk about respect, kindness, and the true meaning of America. Even people who disagreed with Kash politically admitted they were moved by his grace. Karoline never publicly apologized, but weeks later she quietly reached out to Kash behind the scenes. No cameras, no microphones, just a single phone call where her voice cracked as she admitted, "I shouldn't have said that. You were right." Kash didn't gloat. He simply said, "We all make mistakes. What matters is what we learn from them." In the end, the story wasn't about an insult. It wasn't even about politics. It was about the power of choosing compassion over anger, dignity over division. And as America replayed that moment again and again, many were reminded of something they'd nearly forgotten. That the true strength of a nation doesn't come from tearing each other down, but from lifting each other up. Because sometimes, the most powerful answer to hate is kindness. Uplifting closing message. No matter where you come from, No matter the color of your skin or the story of your ancestors, you belong. And kindness, even in the face of cruelty, has the power to change hearts and inspire nations. Narration script, continuation. The clip didn't just go viral, it echoed. Within hours, Kash's response was playing on morning shows, shared on podcasts, and stitched on social media by teenagers who usually wanted nothing to do with politics. But it wasn't the politics that caught their attention, it was the humanity. Teachers replayed it in classrooms. Pastors wove his words into Sunday sermons. Even hardened commentators on opposite sides of the aisle admitted, sometimes reluctantly, that what Kash had shown was the rarest quality in today's world: grace. But the story didn't end there. A week later, Kash received a letter. Not an email, not a tweet, an old-fashioned letter, handwritten in careful script. It came from a World War II veteran in Ohio, 94 years old. The letter read, "Mr. Patel, when she told you to go back, it reminded me of the insults I used to hear as a Jewish kid in the 1930s. But when you responded with dignity instead of anger, I felt proud to be an American all over again. Thank you for reminding me of the country I fought for." Kash sat quietly for a long while, the letter trembling in his hands. He thought about that little boy in Detroit. He thought about his own father, who still drove cabs some weekends just to keep busy. He thought about the countless Americans who had been told, in one way or another, that they didn't belong. And he realized, his response that night wasn't just about him. It was about all of them. A month later, Kash was invited to speak at a community event in Philadelphia. It wasn't political, just a gathering of families, teachers, veterans, and kids. When he stepped onto the stage, there was no anger, no division in the crowd, just anticipation. He held the microphone, scanning the faces, and said, "You know, people ask me if I regret not firing back. They say I should have hit harder, shouted louder. But here's the truth: anger divides. Compassion heals. And America doesn't get stronger when we tear each other apart, it gets stronger when we lift each other up." He paused, letting the words breathe. Parents held their children closer. A teacher nodded quietly. "My parents came here believing in America. But tonight, looking at all of you, I don't just believe in America, I see it. Right here, right now." The audience rose to their feet, applause thundering not for a politician, not for a headline, but for a simple truth they had almost forgotten. Later that night, Kash walked off stage and found Karoline standing in the wings. She had come quietly, away from cameras, away from reporters. Her eyes were softer than he had ever seen. "I wanted to see for myself," she whispered. "Not the TV version. The real you." Kash nodded, offering a small, understanding smile. "We're all more than what the cameras show," he said gently. For a moment, she didn't reply. Then, almost reluctantly, she extended her hand. Kash shook it without hesitation. And just like that, a seed of change was planted. In the end, Kash's story wasn't remembered as the insult heard across America. It was remembered as something else entirely. A reminder that compassion can be louder than hate, and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is refuse to fight fire with fire. Closing reflection for spoken delivery. So the next time someone tries to cut you down, remember Kash Patel's choice. He could have chosen anger. He could have chosen division. Instead, he chose kindness. And in doing so, he reminded millions of people, across America, across the world, that dignity and compassion are not weaknesses. They are strengths. And maybe, just maybe, if more of us chose to answer hatred with humanity, the world would be shocked in the best way possible, just as America was that night. You don't have to shout the loudest to be heard. Sometimes, the quiet power of kindness is what changes everything. Continuation. The ripple effect. In the weeks that followed, something remarkable began to happen. Across America, people who had never heard of Kash Patel before were talking about him, not because of his politics, but because of his humanity. Parents sat at kitchen tables telling their children the story of the man who didn't flinch when insulted. High school debate teams used his words as examples of how to respond with dignity. In coffee shops from New York to Los Angeles, strangers found themselves discussing not just what Kash had said, but how he had said it, with calm, with kindness, with courage. And it didn't stop in America. In London, a teacher shared the clip with her class of immigrant students, saying, "See. This is what belonging looks like." In Toronto, a young Sikh boy told his mother he wasn't ashamed anymore when classmates teased him about his turban, because if Kash could stand tall, so could he. What had started as a cruel insult was now blossoming into a global lesson. One evening, Kash received an invitation. Not from a network, not from a political organization, but from a small middle school in rural Kentucky. The principal wrote, "Our students are struggling with bullying and division. We'd be honored if you could come and share your story." Most public figures would have politely declined. But Kash didn't hesitate. He booked a flight, drove an old rental car down winding country roads, and walked into a modest gymnasium where a few hundred kids sat waiting, restless and curious. He told them the story, honestly, simply, without drama. About the insult, about his parents, about the little boy in Detroit who finally believed he belonged. And then he asked the kids a question. What do you think is stronger? Hate or kindness? For a moment, the room was quiet. Then a small hand in the back shot up. A girl with freckles and a shy voice said, "Kindness. Because hate only makes more hate. But kindness makes more kindness." The gym erupted in applause, not for Kash, but for her. And Kash knew right then, this was why he had answered the way he did. Not for a viral clip. Not for applause. But for this. Planting seeds of kindness in hearts that would grow into something bigger than any insult. Later that night, as Kash walked out into the cool Kentucky air, he thought of his father again, how every shift behind the wheel of that taxi had been an act of quiet sacrifice. He thought of his mother, tending to patients through exhaustion, whispering prayers that her children would have better lives. And he realized, his parents had been teaching him all along how to answer cruelty with compassion. He was simply carrying their lesson forward. The emotional peak. Months later, Kash stood on a stage at a citizenship ceremony. Hundreds of new Americans sat before him, clutching small flags, eyes shining with nervous hope. He looked out over them and said, "Some people may tell you that you don't belong. But let me tell you something. This country is not great because of where you come from. It is great because of what we choose to give to each other. And today, by choosing America, you are giving her your strength, your dreams, your future. Don't ever let anyone take that away from you." As the new citizens stood to take their oath, tears streaming, Kash felt his own throat tighten. This was the real answer to the insult. Not words on television, not applause from a crowd, but lives changed, spirits lifted, the quiet, unstoppable ripple of compassion moving through a nation. Closing reflection. And so the story of Kash Patel didn't end in anger, didn't end in division. It ended in classrooms where children believed they belonged. In homes where families felt seen. In the hearts of people who remembered that kindness, even when it feels small, has the power to heal nations. Because sometimes, one moment of compassion is all it takes to shock the world. Final uplifting note for narration close. The true test of strength isn't how loudly we shout, or how harshly we fight back. It's how deeply we choose to care, even when it's hardest. And that choice, repeated again and again, is what can turn an insult into a movement of hope.